Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again on my YouTube channel. This is Workshop Quick Takes. Today for Basic Auto, we're going to show you how to do the headliner replacement, and in this case we're doing it in a 2000 Jeep Cherokee XJ. Headliner replacements become necessary when the fabric on the surface starts to delaminate from the foam underneath and everything just begins to sag in, or maybe it's just gotten so dirty that you can't deal with it anymore, or maybe the car's been smoked in and you want to try and get that odor out. Old upholstery fabric, unfortunately, usually doesn't just glue back in place neatly, so you really do need to pull the entire liner assembly out of the car. In most vehicles, it's just knowing what tools to use and where to find the plastic clips. Usually you can get a lot of that information online. Today we'll walk you through the XJ Cherokee in order to show you exactly what you have to remove in order to get the headliner out. Then when we have it out, we'll clean it, put fresh upholstery fabric on it, do a couple other odds and ends to improve the overall quality of life living with this vehicle, some extra insulation panels. But at the end of the day, the supplies are not that expensive. You're going to need the headliner upholstery. You can get that pretty cheap online. You're going to need a high quality spray contact adhesive. I'd always recommend using a good known brand like 3M or Gorilla. That'll pretty much do it. Now there's a couple other tasks you might want to think about at the same time. One of them is reupholstering your sun visors. And yes, that's actually easier than you think it is. We'll do that along with the rear soundbar speakers because ours are mounted up in the ceiling and it's the same amount of work to get at them in a future episode. So today, let's take a look at what it takes to reupholster the headliner, and then in our next episode, we'll look at redoing the sun visors and the speakers as well for those of you who might want to tackle a job like that at the same time. Okay everyone, let's take a quick look at what you have to pull in order to get this headliner out, because it isn't a trivial affair and it will vary vehicle by vehicle. A lot of it's just screws and clips, but you do need to know where those screws and clips are, especially on old plastic like this, or you might start breaking things. So yeah, this piece here that arches over the door, it can be removed without pulling anything else out, but you probably have to loosen this one as well down here because they kind of hook together. So there's a bolt back there that holds this on, and then the same thing down in the driver's footwell. There's another one back there. You can try and get this out without doing that just by unsnapping it and then pulling it out, and you might be able to do it. Then coming up the arch over here, there's going to be this pull handle. The way this comes off is that these two plastic pieces slide out, and then there's a bolt hiding back under there. Same thing on this side over here. On both sides, this piece here is entirely in with clips. Work it out one section at a time. Use a plastic crowbar if you have to, otherwise you could break this and then have to either replace it or glue it back together. Ask me how I know. While you're up front, you're also going to have to remove the visors. These have a total of 3 screws, 2 here and 1 back here. And if you have the lighted mirror option, which this one does, then there's also going to be a wire going up through here and a connector that you'll have to disconnect up in there. It should have enough slack on it that you can just pull it out and unclip it. These clips here will also need to be removed, and there's one more screw up in there. You're also going to need to remove the light fixture. Depending which model of Jeep Cherokee you have, you might just have a little flat fixture like the one that's over in the back. If your vehicle came with remote keyless entry installed, then it'll have this drop-down one that includes the 2 nice little map lights because the RKE module is also hidden up in here. This plastic piece here pops off. You can just twist a little screwdriver in it if you want to. You do not have to remove these at this time. And then there are 2 screws in there holding it up to the ceiling. Once those are removed, this just slides forward, drops out. There's a connector for the RKE module, and there's a connector for the lighting power. But of course, if you had a Cherokee Classic or one of the others that had the full bezel assembly up here, ending in a compass and a sunglasses holder and all that fun stuff, then there's going to be a little bit more screws to remove and a couple extra connectors. Stepping into the back seat, it's the same thing again. There's a grab bar here. You got to remove the 2 bolts that are holding that in place. And then this whole piece here should pop out. 2 more screws on each side to remove this back piece. You will have to take that bolt out and remove the seatbelt hook here in order to get that out of the way. Again, same thing on this side. After that, there are 3 more pieces back here that need to be dealt with. If you still have your spare tire installed in the usual place, you're going to have to pull that out, of course. And then this, and this all need to come out. This one here, once you get it out of the way, there's a screw here, screw there. You might need to pop this out as well, depending on whether or not you can work this free. So this top piece, you've got your 2 screws on the back there and then 4 more underneath there. So that's a minimum of 9 pieces of trim you're going to have to potentially loosen, along with these might need to pop out a bit in order to finish getting that out. The rear light assembly up here just pops out. You just got to work in a screwdriver on the side here and work it loose, and then it'll pop loose just like that. And there's another power connector there. The other thing to think about is, when do you want to do the speakers? These actually pop off. There are 5 retention points we'll look at. And then after that, you have to remove the speaker itself if you want to loosen the headliner from the soundbar. Your other option, which is also going to be its own little kettle of fish to fry, is to remove the headliner with the soundbar. But the soundbar has a couple plastic tabs that stick out over in here and up in here. And it's a little difficult to get them out without breaking at least one of them. That might sound like a lot. It kind of is. And again, there's going to be some screws and clips that you got to remove, and you'll probably want to keep those sorted. Most of them are the same length, but a couple are not. My suggestion, if you have trouble keeping track of these things, is as you remove each panel, just bag the hardware you pulled from it, any screws or whatever, put them in plastic bags. And it's tedious work to get it all out of there, but it will go. Once the panel is removed and brought indoors, it will look like this, and it will look larger than it did while installed in the vehicle. So make sure you have a suitable work surface or floor space that won't be patrolled by a dog or toddler, but I repeat myself. Ours does have a bit of delamination starting, but mostly it's just really filthy. And if you try to clean a headliner that's already delaminating, it will probably fall apart. So it's pretty much either live with it or do a full refurbishment. This vehicle happened to have one OE speaker and one aftermarket speaker installed, but either way they remove from the surface exterior, which then frees up the soundbar. And yes, we broke one of the support tabs. That will need to be fixed later. To remove the old headliner upholstery, we can start peeling the cloth back like this, which exposes some kind of deteriorated foam underneath, which then kind of mats and rolls off like, well, what's going on here? Here's a cross-section of the headliner. Some vehicles might use a cardboard or plastic base depending on make and age, but this one uses a dense foam board as the base piece. The foam is bonded on both sides to a heavy, long fiber paper product. To this base assembly, we then find the surface upholstery adds 2 more layers, a soft foam backing and a bonded top cloth. Our replacement headliner upholstery, which can be found from many online vendors including eBay and Amazon by just searching, wait for it, Auto Headliner Upholstery, includes the bonded foam and cloth assembly. So, before we can glue anything on, we first need to completely remove all of the old, deteriorated material. And we need to do it without wrecking the fiber layer or digging into the underlying foam board. Plan on spending an entire evening doing only this. It will be tedious. When a job like this drags on for more than an hour, you start looking for shortcuts. We tried gloves, a heat gun, and a few other things that turned up in the workshop, but the only ones that actually worked well were bare hands and a putty scraper. Note that we're pulling the scraper backwards to avoid punching through the base layer. At one point, acetone seemed like a good idea since it does melt some types of foam. But all it did was make the foam a bit more gooey with no other useful effect, so we put it away again. Eventually, the putty scraper and a lot of patience got the job done. Now that you're looking at a bare panel, you'll need to make any necessary repairs. The unprotected outer edge is particularly prone to breakup. We thought foil tape would be a great idea there, but something about the liner's surface would not bond well to the tape's adhesive. We made it work with re-gluing, but in retrospect a can of brush-on contact adhesive used by woodworkers, yes, the really stinky stuff that has all those open flame warnings on the side, would have been better, along with paper drywall seam tape. If we ever do another one, that's what we'll try first. Later, we did glue on paper reinforcing strips in several places. On the back side, this headliner panel has a few foam strips that space the headliner against the roof cross braces. These prevent rattling and also space the panel from the roof to create an air gap. But the foam strips deteriorate and need replacing, so adhesive weather strip will work. But once again we had bonding issues. A couple days later, after it popped loose for the 10th time or so, we finally hit it with 3M weather strip adhesive, and that did do the job. Now, about that air gap. You have the option to add insulation panels in the open areas. These can help reduce that easy bake oven feeling while sitting out in the hot summer sun. Here, we've chosen to use aluminized, expanded foam panels purchased off eBay. These were advertised as hood and firewall insulation for an engine compartment, But gray market is as gray market does, and a quick torch check proved that these were just about as flammable as the contents of the fuel system. So they're not going anywhere near the engine compartment, but up here is a good use for them. The panels have adhesive backing, but again, things weren't bonding well, so we primed the headliner panel with 3M Super 77, and that helped. This next step wasn't strictly necessary, but we got the idea to reinforce around the dome light opening by laying down strips of heavy mesh tape normally sold for seaming concrete boards in baths and showers. We then took a tube of subfloor construction adhesive left over from another project and worked it into the mesh to create a slightly flexible, high-strength bond. It appeared to work. And for good measure, we also ran a thin bead of the same adhesive around each insulation panel to seal them down. It gets hot up next to the roof, so this should help prevent them from peeling away over time. Finally, if you plan to upgrade your rear soundbar speakers while doing this work, now is the time to do any final test fitment and adjustments to the speaker openings. We'll look closer at the speaker replacement process in another segment, but in any case, we're now done repairing and upgrading the panel itself, and it's time to lay in the new upholstery. Some basic rules for upholstery. First, lay out the working surface with the full sheet before applying any glue, fasteners, or whatever. You want to be certain that the material will fully and correctly cover the panel. Also, if the fabric is badly rumpled from shipping or storage, spreading it out for a while will help the wrinkles smooth out. You can try applying a clothes iron to the fabric side, but remember that this is an all-synthetic product that both melts and snags easily. Second, once you are ready to apply the adhesive, don't apply it all at once. Roll the material back in workable sections that can be sprayed, allowed to tack up, and then bonded in smooth, uniform passes. This will help you avoid bubbles and wrinkles in the final assembly. Third, when using a spray adhesive such as 3M Super 77, 3M High Strength 90, Gorilla Heavy Duty, to name a few that we've used recently, make sure to apply a generous coat to both surfaces and then allow plenty of time for the initial flash off, or tacking up. Contact adhesives, whether spray-on type or the can full of death fumes type that require a paintbrush, all operate by this principle. Spread, allow the solvent to flash off so that the surface tacks up, and then, and only then, bring both surfaces together. You will then experience an instant and usually permanent bond, even though it takes a little more time to fully cure, so work slowly and purposefully through the process. With contact adhesive, you typically don't get a second chance to reposition anything. Fourth, let the materials have adequate curing time before you re-expose them to the elements. Typically this is, say, 12 to 24 hours after the initial assembly, but read the label to be sure. Oh, and one other thing, the area on and behind the soundbar on this vehicle is difficult to cover as some upholstery types, including the one we bought, won't really stretch enough to wrap the speaker projections without wrinkles or bubbles. We opted to use a few stitches of embroidery thread from the local fabric store, conveniently located next door to Harbor Freight, to lock down a particularly tricky area behind these speakers. It wasn't a perfect job, but it's good enough and nobody ever looks up there. Okay, now that the fabric is fully glued down to the backer board, it's time to trim the excess and clear out the many holes required for devices that mount to or through the backer, such as dome lights, speakers, and sun visors. A sharp knife is useful for trimming along large holes in the outer edges, along with a careful sort of patience. You don't want to be slicing off your fingertips here. For removing small irregularities, try tugging on the fabric while very gently pushing the knife against the cut line. This technique also works for making thin cutlets from larger sections of raw meat, just in case this job is making you hungry. For smaller holes, we're using the old hot nail trick to melt through the fabric. Our upholstery fabric is a fully synthetic product, so we can heat a nail on a propane torch until it's almost glowing, then punch neat holes through the fabric, or even trace outlines of holes. The heat creates a neat, self-sealing edge that typically won't fray or unravel later. If you try to do this, we do recommend securing the nail in a vice grip pliers and keeping a fire extinguisher nearby, just in case. Try not to breathe the cancer smoke, and if you have a central fire alarm system that might auto-dial an emergency service or chase your neighbors out of their homes, you might want to pay attention to what's on the ceiling above your work area.
Uh-oh.
With that step done, you have one more opportunity to perform a quick ironing job if you feel the upholstery needs it. Once we were satisfied that our headliner replacement was complete, the final step was to reinstall it. To begin the reinstallation process, the soundbar needs to be replaced by snapping its two support tabs back into their slots. Although we removed the soundbar with the headliner, this may not have been the best idea, and we definitely don't recommend reinstalling it that way. The headliner then needs to go into the vehicle via the liftgate, same way it came out. To support it from the rear, we hand-turned the rear shoulder belt bolts by 5 threads or so and left them there as hooks. To support the headliner from the front, the 2 sun visor clips were reinstalled, and that worked well enough. After that, we reinstalled the front dome light fixture in order to improve visibility. Once the cover is secured from 4 points, you can choose how to reinstall the rest. One way or another, you need to get the 2 rear soundbar speakers installed, along with their covers. The rear dome light, of course, and then, with the headliner suspended from the soundbar, you can pull those rear shoulder belt bolts back out and properly reinstall the rear seat belts. At this point, you can also reinstall the front sun visors whenever convenient. And at some point after that, you can get cracking on putting all those trim panels back in place. Start from the rear of the vehicle and move forward, and you should be fine. Everyone, thanks for coming along on that ride. We appreciate you joining us today. Next time, we will look at what it takes to redo the sun visor upholstery and the rear soundbar speakers, in case those are jobs you might be wanting to look into. But for now, we hope that this gives you some ideas on how to clean up, improve, and maybe even change the look and appearance of your vehicle. See you again next time, whenever that is. Has anyone seen my phone?